Father Cristino, welcome back.
Thank you, Ken.
Today, I'd like your thoughts on this proposed ban on prayer, public prayer in Quebec. Did you hear about this?
Yes, I have heard about this.
So it's concerning. It's like Quebec wants to ban God.
Right.
Cancel God. So the article that I came across was CBC. I want to read you the article and then get your reaction on that.
Sure, yes.
Secular Minister Jean-François Robert said in a statement Thursday that the proliferation of street prayer is a serious and sensitive issue. The Premier of Quebec has given me the mandate to strengthen secularism, and I am determined to fulfill this mandate diligently, he said. This fall, we will therefore introduce a bill to strengthen secularism in Quebec, in particular by banning street prayers. Premier François Legault said, seeing people pray in the streets, in public parks, is not something we want in Quebec, Legault said in December, saying he wanted to send a very clear message to Islamists. When we want to pray, we go to a church, we go to a mosque, but not in public places. And yes, we will look at the means where we can act illegally or otherwise. So, Father Cristino, as a priest, when you hear this, what is your reaction?
Anger, frustration, disbelief that there could be such a depth of ignorance. That's what I think drives the proposed bill that they're talking about here. It's ignorance. It's ignorance of what they're saying, of the implications of what they want to enforce, and of their diagnosis, that they think they have found a problem. People don't want this in Quebec. What do they mean by that? People don't want this. Clearly, the people who do that want it, or they wouldn't be doing it. So right away, you're excluding a percentage of your population by saying people don't want this in Quebec. Who is that? Who are they talking to that says that they don't want that? In previous conversations that we've had on talking about culture, we've also talked about where culture comes from, which is from worship. Quebec also has a very robust ministry of culture. They are obsessed in that province with maintaining and preserving the French culture that are the origins of that province, while standing apart from all of the rest of predominantly Anglophone Canada. And their culture is not just about the French language. Language can hold a culture together, but it does not give birth to one. And so they are fighting desperately to maintain something that it's like a stool. If it only has one leg, it's not going to stand. You cannot sit on it. There have to be all of the necessary legs to hold up the thing that you're trying to do. They are pitting secularism against religion. But secularism is just another form of worship. It is what they have replaced Catholicism with. But Catholicism is a religion. So you can't replace it unless you've replaced it with something like it. Secularism is just another form of worship. It is the worship of self. That I am the object of my worship, because I give myself what I want. And we live by the utilitarian rule that as long as I'm not hurting anyone else, I should be allowed to do whatever I want. It's a kind of individualism and radical libertarianism that pays no attention to the common good and that does not ask whether or not the absence of something also could potentially harm others, even if it's not clear that its absence is the cause of the harm. What harm might be caused to Quebec by banning public prayer? They haven't actually conceived of the possibility that getting rid of it introduces a different problem, because they would say that either that's not a problem or they would blame it on something else.
So what do you see the potential problems with down the road with this?
The privatization of religion, driving religious people into spaces where they are told this is the only place where you're allowed to do this. It divides people, first of all, but then that's what gives birth to radicalization. And I'm not just talking about radical Islam. anyone can practice their religion or any of their philosophical beliefs radically. And when we talk about something becoming radicalized, I think what we're saying is we acknowledge the goodness of the thing in itself, but when taken to a particular extreme, it begins to no longer resemble what it was meant to be in the first place. And radical secularization, which would have begun by saying, we're just not going to have an official religious stance, is now turning into the condemnation of religion. And that is not what secularism is supposed to be.
What is secularism supposed to be?
Well, even in the word, the etymology secular comes from the Latin word secula, which is what we would call like century, a century. Mm-hmm. It's a way of talking about time. It's saying that for something to be secular, it's of the time. It's what's predominant now, basically, is a kind of way that you could describe what secularism is about. It is seen as the alternative to religion. And that's why I'm saying it's a fundamental misunderstanding. You can't have an alternative to religion. Human beings were made to worship. You will worship something. You may not worship God. You may not worship Jesus Christ as God, but you will worship something. And in a civilization of rampant individualism, what do you think we begin to worship? Ourselves. So to say that secularism is an alternative to religion so that no religion gets to have the upper hand or dominates a population, like the people of Quebec would say that they were dominated by the Catholic Church for so long. Okay? Free yourself of that then. Say you have to go away and hide in your little private space. And then what will happen? Something will give rise to the reaction that comes from having been driven into a ghetto. Sometimes that looks really ugly, and that's the only thing we ever think about. But other times, I think it actually also just gives it power. We witnessed in Quebec something happened earlier this year, around the feast of Corpus Christi. A Eucharistic procession took place, which was customary decades ago, but it has not been customary, as you can imagine, for a very long time. And if I remember correctly, they processed from St. Patrick's Basilica down René Lévesque Boulevard to the cathedral. And there must have been thousands of people who were flocking behind the Blessed Sacrament, being brought in procession down this very busy major thoroughfare. I'm not surprised that the reaction to that was to say, this kind of thing can't happen here because it looks religious. I'm saying all of the effort that they've put into driving religion out of society is precisely what gives birth to a desire to do that. If that was treated as something not only normal, not merely acceptable, but as actually a characteristic element of our culture, then it would just be taken to be normal. It's not radical. It's how you manage radicalization, by letting things just be normal. So they are undermining exactly what they say they're doing this for, which is we don't want to appear like we're some kind of radical religious society. That's exactly what they're going to get.
So if this bill does go forward, what are the implications for the Catholic Church in Quebec?
Well, I guess it depends how much the Catholic Church in Quebec would decide to try and push back against it. And numerically speaking, there is just not the manpower of committed faithful Catholics in Quebec to actually, I think, put up a sufficient stand to say, we will not accept this. We are being excluded. You say that people in Quebec don't want this. Well, we're people in Quebec and we do. So don't tell us that. You don't want this. Your government doesn't want this. Premier Legault is a hypocrite. I hate to put it that way, but he was all about having Pope Francis come to the province of Quebec. And we had to bend over backwards to do things to showcase Quebec when the Pope came to Canada.
And you were part of it.
I was part of it. I was I wasn't directly at the table with Premier Legault having these conversations, but I know what was going on because I was helping to organize the program. And who turned out? Next to no one. I went to a concert on Canada Day when I was in Quebec on my last visit there before the Pope was going to come. I was finalizing details, and there must have been 50 or 60,000 people in the Plains of Abraham watching this French musician perform. It was really exciting. I thought, wow, do you think are we going to fill the Plains of Abraham when we bring the Pope through here? No, not a chance. People just didn't come.
How many people were there?
I don't know. A few thousand. Not 10,000. Definitely not 50,000.
Really?
So
I didn't know that.
That is shocking for a variety of reasons. But what would be the reason to be glad to bring the Pope to your province when one of your main concerns is driving out of the public eye anything to do with religion? It's a contradiction. Legault was quite concerned about getting a private audience with the Pope, which had to be facilitated for him at the airport before the Pope could even leave. So I just think that it's disingenuous and it is insincere to claim that this is for the best interests of our province because people don't want this, when in actual fact, it is merely the approval of one kind of religious expression, which you pretend isn't a religious expression, when in actual fact, it's just what you're trying to replace religion with. That's a contradiction.
I think you have a greater grasp on the Canadian Bill of Charter of Rights and Freedoms than I do. I know it seems to be like an interest. Am I? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So I haven't read as much as you on it. I'll admit that. So when we talk about the banning of public prayer, isn't that a violation? Some, especially American friends watching, like, how can you ban public prayer?
Right.
In Canada, is it different than it is in the United States when it comes to this area? Or is this a clear violation of our rights and freedoms here in this country?
Well, it's absolutely a violation of our inherent rights and freedoms, just as a human being, irrespective of anything the government has ever written down on paper. We were made to worship. And you can say, well, that's just your religious belief. And I would say, no, it's not. Because we will worship something. And here you worship the decaying culture that you think you're fighting to preserve and defend. You will worship something. And so we were made for this, then to say that we must do it only ever in private, that no one else should ever be subjected to seeing you worship God as you understand God is meant to be worshipped. That's ludicrous. Why is that supposed to be hidden? Why is that inappropriate or offensive to someone? If you don't like it, don't watch. We have all sorts of parades nowadays that I find offensive, and the response to me is, that's your problem. Why would we allow picketing for people that are going on strike? Why would we have any other kind of external demonstration if the possibility of offending someone is present, and therefore we shouldn't be allowed to do it? It's cherry picking and saying, no, we just don't want this. Other things, that's fine. In fact, we'll even promote them. We don't want this kind. Don't tell me a pride parade doesn't have a kind of religious element to it as well. It absolutely does. It's the ritualization of something that you want to be brought forward for the public to be confronted by. You call it pride for a reason. Pride isn't hidden. Pride isn't secret. I don't think the government of Quebec has any intentions about getting rid of those because they are offensive to the sensibilities of some people who see them happen. In fact, they would probably turn it on the people who are offended and say, you have a problem. You're what's wrong with society because you get offended by that. Well, then why wouldn't we give that same answer to people who would say that they're offended by watching Muslims pray or Catholics processed on the street with the Blessed Sacrament?
This seems so odd. Canadians know, but maybe Americans watching don't, that Quebec is the motherland of Catholicism for our country. It was sent
For our continent.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. It was so important. Quebec was Catholicism. And I mean, I did a little bit of research, and there was one point in Quebec where nearly 90%, prior to the 1960s, 90% of Catholics went to Mass in Quebec.
Every Sunday.
Every Sunday. Now it's 2 or less than 2%. There's just an absolute plummeting, loss of faith. I often wonder, like, what in the world happened? Like, and now it's not just a loss of faith. It's almost like a hatred of the faith. Mm-hmm. You are not, we don't want to see this. We don't want to remember this.
Right.
Quebec has lost their memory.
Yes. I don't know if they've lost their memory or they're choosing to forget. I think those are different. And to know that the province you love and the culture that you seek to preserve is intricately woven in with Catholicism, whose teachings most now would despise. You have to reconcile that somehow. How can I keep this but get rid of that? And I think a variety of efforts have been made for however long since something that took place that we would call the Quiet Revolution, which was really just a quite rapidly spreading societal rebellion against the prominent role that Catholicism played in Quebec. And there was a sense in which I think you could justifiably say, particularly the hierarchy of the church, was exercising an influence that it was not appropriate to have, especially in political affairs. The church, this concept of the separation of church and state, that might be a whole other topic of conversation, but it doesn't exist. The church and the state are not capable of remaining separate. They're not supposed to be separate. The state should be informed by the church, and the church should uphold the rights and the duties of the state. They are complementary. They should be capable of working together, because in the gospel, our Lord himself made it clear that these things are not mutually exclusive from each other. So yet again, another one of these concepts that, well, we're just going to make the separation of church and state the law of the land here. No, you won't. You can't. It's impossible. One will just have a ballooned or conflated source of power compared to the other one. And there was a period of time when I think you could argue justifiably that the church's influence in Quebec was beyond what it ought to have been. And so it provoked a reaction. That is still having its effect to this very day. However, I don't know that it needs to remain that way. I'm in contact with a number of Catholic movements that are really taking off in Quebec, where young people are now in such a desperate state. They look around the world and they just don't even know what to make of what they're seeing going on around them. They're looking for something. I witness this all the time in my little town of 14,000 people. Young people just walking in off the street to come into our church and ask if they can just look at it or sit in it for a few minutes. People are really desperate. So I don't think they know that they're going back to their roots. I think they're looking for roots. And I wonder if a generation of legislators in the province of Quebec right now think that this is our last chance to stomp this out once and for all. That's not going to work.
Wow. So let's say this goes forward, the bill is passed. What's the response of the church then at that point? Do you say, oh, we're still going to have a Corpus Christi celebration?
Well, on the one hand, you could say, yes, we ought to do that. But at the same time, the police potentially being called will only be just following what they're being told that they have to do, that this public demonstration isn't allowed to be happening, or these roads aren't allowed to be blocked. So I'm not sure that showing that you're being so forward in your rebellion will accomplish the desired effect. But I think still doing things visibly and in public would be very important.
Can you give an example?
Oh, I would say that you're not causing any harm to anyone to be in a public space where it could be heard that this group of people are praying the rosary together. Go to a picnic area. Everyone is free to choose a picnic table. Well, you sit down and someone starts the rosary, and what are you going to do about that? Are the police going to come to a park and take people who are at picnic tables away because of the things that they're saying? The sound that's coming out of their mouth? Because that's not allowed to happen here right now. If you want to get on the table and sing at the top of your lungs, that's fine, but not praying, it's unenforceable. And so I think the church would be very wise to say, we will push this to the absolute limit that we can, wherever we can, to say, we will not comply with this unjust law.
So, I mean, the Pope came to Quebec. I presume that there was some sort of public displays of prayer. I didn't follow exactly what happened in Quebec. I mean, so if this bill passed, I'm guessing that the Pope could come next time if he wanted to, but he just couldn't pray publicly.
Can you imagine? Sorry, Holy Father, you're very welcome here.
We'll have a private audience.
But if you could please just keep it in private. Now, sadly, that would have worked just fine, because we did not even fill the Basilica of Saint Anne de Beaupré. We anticipated the possibility that there could be as many as 15,000 people around the outside of the Basilica and on the other side of the highway. They just weren't there.
Wow.
So, and there's a variety of reasons, like I said, but there is such a pervasive cooling throughout the province of Quebec towards the Catholic faith. But I don't believe that's the end of the story there. It doesn't have to be. And I know that there are people who are refusing to let it be. And that's all it takes. That's how the church has always grown. Some, even few, committed, faithful Catholics, they can put forth an outcome, a desire, a fervor that is unstoppable, if only they choose to. And I know that there are people there in that province who choose to.
Would you have any concern if this bill is passed that there's then something else around the corner? Like perhaps a policing of what can be said and or not said within a church now? So,
well, we're already there. The threat, the limits that are being put on free speech, instead of defining and having a civil debate about what constitutes speech, right? We never define our terms. We never talk about first principles. We only ever talk about outcomes. You're not allowed to hurt people's feelings, so we're going to have to limit people's speech. That's a pretty big gap in between those two things. This is just yet another example of that. Because of this desired effect, that's going to be our solution. That's our path forward. And instead of evaluating, is this even a justifiable thing to say that people should not be subjected to? You can't control people's feelings. So how can I make sure that you don't get your feelings hurt? That's impossible. Mm-hmm. And so the imposition upon religion that the government has decided, religion causes X, Y, and Z, so it's going to have to be done in private. It's in the government, any government is incapable of making that kind of assessment. It's arbitrary.
But I feel like if I was in Quebec, I'd be like, well, if this goes through, what's next?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I think that's a legitimate concern. Would you have any concern about that then spreading to other places in other provinces in Canada, or is Quebec kind of like isolated in their own thing?
Quebec has often been just a kind of isolated entity apart from the rest of the country. But it is still very much a trend, and we see it actually, I think, spreading more rapidly in places like Europe than we would see it, at least in Western Canada. You know, we have kindred provinces, I think, in Alberta and Saskatchewan. That just wouldn't fly here. People just, not only would they not accept it, there's just not a groundswell of people asking for it. You're not going to find a preponderance of the population of either of our provinces saying we're offended when we see people praying in public. We have, I think, sensible people here who would say, well, if I'm offended, then I'm going to have to leave. Mm-hmm. If you go to a movie and you don't like the content of the movie, you have to go. You don't get the theater to turn it off and put something different on. So that's how real life works. Having the government come in and decide how they're going to control people's feelings is absurd. And I'm not sure that this bill will even go forward. And if it does, it will be contested and undermined and unenforced more than you can imagine. But that it's being attempted is what's offensive.
Mm-hmm. So in response to this, what should faithful Catholics do?
Well, as in any situation that a right or a duty even is being contradicted, I think it should be spoken out against. So at the very least, faithful Catholics should publicly voice their opposition to something like this being put forward. But then, obviously, in addition to the supernatural means of praying and fasting and all of that, the preparedness to say, we just won't tolerate this. And I hope that they will find the backing and support of their pastors and bishops to say, we don't accept this. An unjust law is no law at all. And not only is this an unjust law, it is an unjustifiable law. They can't even find a way to make it just. It is an arbitrary imposition of a particular government's will on an entire population. And faithful Catholics need to be prepared to stand up and call that out and contradict it.
Well, thanks for your words today.
Thank you.